Let me start by saying the Winnipeg Blue Bombers finished last year, so it gives me a great deal of pleasure to say that. Let me ask you folks, does anyone here speak the language acclaimed, which is where Sankofa comes from? Because if nobody here speaks that language, now I have full license to pretend like I do speak the language. But I have, in fact, looked up a few words that I think are very significant. So I'm going to say it first, Abofono Ebira Gwaha. Now, I had planned on reciting that without looking down, but I just didn't have the guts to do it. So I had to check the notes. And what that means is sick, not weak. And those are words that I have come to say more often than my family would like me to say them. But I believe those three words sum up how I look at my mental illness and how I think all of you should look at anybody else's mental illness, and in particular, how you should look at your own mental illness. Now, Sankofa means reaching back into the past. And for me, reaching back into the past with mental illness means reaching back for the baggage of my past, going back and talking about and thinking about the biggest struggles in my life. Let me say that I can learn the language acclaimed, and you can all learn the language, and you can learn to speak German and French and Spanish and anything else. But the one language you can't learn to speak is the language of depression. And that's why it's so valuable for someone like me to get up on stage or go on a television show and talk about mental illness. Because I can guarantee you, I can talk to those of you in the audience who have suffered, and I understand exactly what it feels like, and I can talk to you, and if you are suffering right now, the two symptoms that I can help you with are hopelessness and loneliness. Loneliness can only be reduced if someone understands you, if there's someone around you. Like I've said to doctors, I went to speak to a group of doctors, and I thought of keeping them waiting for 3 hours, just the way they kept me waiting for 3 hours. And I actually tried to talk above them the way they talk above me, but unfortunately I couldn't get up that high. But I think that the most important thing I can do is say, you could have 50 doctors up here, 50. And they're all talking, they're all psychiatrists, they're all experts. They're all weird, but they're all conversant in mental illness. But you know what? I could get through to someone who was struggling way better than they could because I speak the language. If you've ever suffered, then you know what I'm going to talk about. If you've ever suffered, I guarantee when you wake up in the morning, the first thing you think before anything else is, I will experience no joy over the course of the day. And for me, that is the number one symptom of depression, the inability to experience joy. And if you can't experience joy, then that day is no better than a day spent dead. The difference is you can come back from that, of course. And the other symptom is wherever you are, you want to be someplace else. If I'm standing over here and I'm having a bad day, I'm thinking, oh man, I got to get away from the right side of that stage, or stage left for you guys. So I move over here and I feel just as bad. And then I say, I can't wait to get off this stage. So I go to work, and then I'm around the people at work, and I think to myself, I got to get away from these people. I got to get away from this environment. Help me. So I go someplace else. It's always the same. It's like you're chasing something that you can't find. So the number one date for me is October the 20th, 2009. That was the day on Off the Record, the show that I host, that I spoke for the first time about my own struggles with depression. I had been struggling since 1997, but I never talked about it on TV because I actually thought to myself, well, like, why would I? Who would care? Why does my experience, my suffering, my struggle, why would that have any impact on anybody's life? And the answer I found out afterwards. So we had a guest called Stéphane Richer on the show. Stéphane Richer, if you're a hockey fan, you might know that he is a two-time Stanley Cup champion, last Montreal Canadian, last cheat and have to score 50 goals. See, it depends what city you're in. You can make that joke here. There's places where you can't make that joke, but I'd have the guts to do it in Montreal. So Stéphane Richer, two-time 50-goal scorer, last Canadian to score 50 goals, two-time Stanley Cup champion. I had read somewhere that in 1995, when he won the Stanley Cup with the New Jersey Devils, he had come out and shared the fact that he was struggling miserably with depression. And in fact, 5 days after that, he had attempted suicide. But I read about that, and I never heard him talk about it. So I said to him in the green room of OTR, I can remember the scene because this is life-changing for me, folks. October the 20th, 2009. I say, Stefan, you don't know me, you don't owe me anything. But I'd like to ask you about your struggles with depression because I've never heard you talk about it. So I said, you have no obligation to do this. If it's painful, please don't do it. And when I throw it out there, I'll throw it out in the context of, I too have suffered. I have been where you are because I think it would be interesting. Now, I wasn't trying to help anyone. I wasn't trying to save anyone. I was just trying to do interesting television, which is my job. And I thought, hey, most people don't ask him about that. Maybe I have an entree into it because I've struggled as well. So he thought about it, and there was this really long pause. And at the time, I didn't really care that much because it was just a topic. And then he said, yeah. And I could tell that it was painful for him. I could tell that it was difficult for him to, I don't know if you can use Sankova as a verb, but I'm going to try. It was difficult for him to Sankova, to go back in time because this was really painful for him. So we went on the air. Maybe 2 minutes, we talked about this. Maybe 2 minutes. I asked him how he's doing, and I said, well, you know, I've struggled as well, severely at times. My last big struggle was 2008, and that was it. So we talked about it. After the show went to air, all of a sudden, the inbox has about 30 emails. The first 10 were typical. You suck, Landsberg. I hate your guts. You don't know anything about. And I'm used to that, right? And that's the nature of television because there's nothing wrong with that. But then it's like, oh my gosh, there's like about 24 more. I thought, wow, I must have really sucked today. But it's not that. It's, hey, Michael, just want to let you know that seeing you and Stefan talk about your own struggles with depression has changed my life. It has allowed me to message you, and you are the first person that I have ever told about my struggles. And tomorrow, I will go back to my family doctor, and I will tell him. And this was repeated over and over again. So I corresponded with these people. I mean, there was only 24 of them. I wasn't getting back to the guy who told me I sucked, so I thought, you know what, I should respond to these people because, these are heartfelt messages. You have to understand, what I do for the most part is pretty superficial. I mean, you know, like, hey, how do you think the Leafs are going to do this year? That kind of stuff. But these were from the heart. These were messages that were incredibly difficult for these people to write. What a gift it was to me to hear people's thoughts that they had voiced for the first time. So we went back and forth, and I can remember all of these conversations because they were the first ones I ever had. So let's skip forward 2 years now. Bell Let's Talk Day, the first one. I get an email from a Tyson Williams. He's told me to use his name. It says, Michael, great to talk to you. You don't remember me. And of course, I did remember him. I remember corresponding with him. He said to me in this email, he said, what you don't know or remember, because you couldn't possibly know this, is that when you were communicating with me, I had made the commitment to kill myself. I had taken a belt, I had put it on a hook in a closet, and I was going to kill myself because I had suffered from depression for so long that I thought to myself, I can't live with this pain. So he messaged me, and it was obviously a very profoundly negative message. It was, you know, I've struggled and I believe there's help. I can't share with anyone because I'm too embarrassed. So I messaged him back and said, okay, well, let's start with the idea of sharing. Because if you do not share with anyone, there is no help. If you've struggled with depression or any kind of mental illness for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 5 years, you can bet tomorrow when you wake up in the morning, you will struggle with depression because it's not going away. So you got to push it away. So I tried to give him that encouragement. We went back and forth, and he said, what you don't know is every time you messaged me, I was in the closet putting the belt back on the hook, and I was going to kill myself. Well, I didn't know any of this. And he said, eventually I looked at the computer and said, oh man, that guy doesn't shut up even on email. He said, but I thought, well, you know, he is saying that, I actually said to him, if you want to take your own life, you can always do it down the road. You can always do it after you've tried to get help. But how does this multiply the tragedy if you kill yourself without ever having found out if there's help out there? I said to him, look, 2008, this is another date, November the 19th, Grey Cup week. I'm in Montreal. I'm staying in my hotel room, the Marriott. It's 3:30 in the morning. And I have suffered the last 8 months previous to that with the deepest, worst depression of my life. I am in ultra pain at that point. I hate everything. I hate everything I do. I hate myself. I've lost all my self-confidence. I got to go and look into a camera every day on television thinking to myself, I have nothing to say. I have nothing good to say. I have no talent for this. I have no place on here, and everyone knows it. When I look into the camera, that I'm a fake. So this is what I was experiencing on that day in November in 2008. And I remember 3:30 a.m. sitting on the end of my bed thinking, wow, I am really in trouble. And I sank COVID on that day back to a day in 1998 when I sat in the green room of Off the Record. We had just started the show, and I was with Lennox Lewis, the heavyweight champion of the world. And I was at that point suffering from my first bout with depression. And I was really struggling to the point where if it was appropriate, I would have cried. If it was appropriate, I would have left. All I could think about was get out of here, get out of here. And he was so lovely, Lennox Lewis. He had actually brought a book of pictures of himself when he grew up in Kitchener. He was saying, hey, look at this. I used to watch you on Sportscast. How about this and this? I thought should be this great, unbelievable experience. He's the heavyweight champion of the world, and here he is sharing his life with me, but I couldn't wait to get out of there. So I fast forward now, Sankofa, to 2 weeks later, when the medication I had started kicked in and I felt better. I'm at a restaurant in Toronto, I'm at the front with my wife, and I say, I've got to go to the washroom. As I'm walking to the back, I go, oh my God, I feel better. This was still one of the greatest moments of my life. It was the medication that I was on had started to work. And this reminded me just how far I had slipped. You see, depression doesn't hit you like a baseball bat hits you, where you go, oh my gosh, I'm depressed. Drop by drop by drop. A little of who you are leaves you, and the new person starts to set in. And you don't notice it. It's just like you're in the bath, and the bath is hot. And before you know it, the bath is not hot anymore. But did you notice it not getting hot? No, it's just one day the accumulation of this hits you, and you realize, I'm really sick. So that was back in 1998 when I had my first relief from depression. So in 2008, when I was struggling in the Marriott Hotel at 3:30 in the morning, I was able to look back and say, I was just as bad then, I made it out, I can make it out again. Now, fast forward to 2 years after the Stefan Richer show. You guys following all of this? There's a lot of dates here. And I mean, it's easy for me to follow because the truth is I may be making up these dates because the exact date doesn't matter. It's not like you're going to go, hey, wait a second here. The Richer show wasn't on October the 20th. It was the 19th. Good for you if you know that. So Tyson Williams sends me a letter that says I was in the process of killing myself. But because you talked about your struggle, you being where I am now, I feel like maybe, first of all, maybe I'm not as weak as I thought I was, sick not weak. I'm not as embarrassed as I thought I should be. So maybe now I can reach out for help, and maybe now I can get some help. And you know what? After I try, I can always put the belt back on the hook. So he said, I went to the doctor the next day. And a month later, I thought, oh, thank God I didn't die. Fast forward to 2.5 months ago, I got an email with a picture of Tyson Williams from Saskatoon with a Boston Bruins jersey on, sitting in a chair with a little girl on his lap named Abigail. And he said, Abigail Williams, born 2 weeks ago, my baby, my life now, my joy. I'm here because somebody else talked about it. Now, I don't see this as in any way being quote unquote heroic. This is not me saying, oh, look what I did. Because the truth is, all I did was share. That's it. All I did is stand up via email and on television and say what I'm going to say to you right now. I mean, this doesn't take any bravery for me because God knows I'm not embarrassed. I'm not ashamed. I don't feel weak. But what changed and saved his life was simply these words. I struggle from mental illness. I struggle terribly with depression at times. I am on medication for the rest of my life. And for him to hear that, it was all of a sudden, well, Landsberg, that guy could be a jerk. And that guy, you know what? He seems pretty cocky. He seems pretty proud of himself. But God, he never seemed weak. So when those words come out of my mouth, immediately you say, well, I don't think Landsberg's weak. Maybe depression isn't about weakness. And that's at the heart of the stigma. That's at the heart of this battle that we all need to fight, because we are still beginning this battle, folks. We are still at the very beginning of addressing the concept of this thing called mental illness that we don't understand in any way. You see, I can't show you proof that I'm sick. I can't show you an x-ray. I can't show you a biopsy. I can't show you an MRI where I go, hey, look at this. This proves it. So you think to yourself, well, God, maybe I want to help Michael. He's a good guy, right? So I'm going to talk to him afterwards. We meet in the hall and you say, Michael, let me give you some advice. Appreciate the good things in your life. Michael, get out and do more things. Enjoy life. What do you have to be depressed about? Those are the things that you say to someone when you don't understand the language, when you don't speak the language. So that's why guys like me are really valuable. Not because we're saying anything so brilliant. Not because we're doing anything other than throwing something on the table that says to somebody else, you know what? I'm not ashamed. I'm not embarrassed. And I'm not weak. Sick, not weak. 3 words that if you can embrace them, make a difference. Now, 10% of the planet will suffer from depression, 90% won't. But this is more directed to the 90% who don't and won't suffer from depression, because you will all know someone, all love someone, all care about someone who struggles. And you will, if you love that person, desperately want to help them, desperately. But you will have no idea how to do it, because you don't speak the language. Because in your language, you look at these people and you think to yourself, well, you know what? I'm going to give them, I want to help them. So I'm going to tell my son, you know what? Go to a movie, go out with friends, and you'll feel better. And that makes perfect sense to you. But to me, in my head, that's the stupidest thing in the world. It's like, no, I'm going to go out, but I'm not going to feel any better. This is not going to wear off because I'm in a better surrounding, because I'm with my friends. It's not about that. So the message is just as important to the 90% of you who will be lucky enough not to suffer than it is to the 10% who have suffered. And one more date, August 31st, 2011. Wade Belak, really good friend of mine, took his own life. And that said to everybody who knew him, there's this thing called the mask that people like me can wear, and you have no idea that we're sick. August 31st, 2011. Wade took his own life. I had spoken to him 3 days before. I had spoken to him about doing a documentary, which I ended up doing on depression, and he said, yeah, I would talk because I'm retired now, and now I can share, and now I can make it clear to everyone that I've been struggling, but before I was afraid to do that. A tragedy in my life, a tragedy in his family's life that they will never recover from. We need to change the world that we live in, the environment that we live in. We need to make people feel like you're not weak, you're sick. And if you can look at mental illness as a sickness, not a weakness, then you will save a life. Abofono o abira guaha. Yeah, I screwed up the pronunciation, but the message is sick, not weak. Thanks, folks.